But Sri Lanka is also blooding some youth here. Manudi Nanyakara is in the squad. We also have Chetani Vimukti and Rashmika as well. So we've got three rookies on our side. We have Imesha Dulani as well, who hasn't played very many games. And I think it's kind of exciting to think about how Sri Lanka is going to put their side together. So they played a 40 over match, and Nanayakara scored a 58 off 59, really kind of good innings, batting in the fourth spot. Chamre, of course, didn't play, and it'll be interesting to see if that innings kind of earns her a spot somewhere in the order. I think one of the big questions is, can someone provide power down the order? And Vishmi Gunaratne also scored a 50 in that, and so she looked good. I wouldn't be surprised if Nana Yakara gets a game in here, especially with the ODI squad. She seems to be sort of well made for that. She's on the back of a good World Cup, of a good set of good performances. So she's one to look for in the future. She's only 18 years old, someone well worth investing in. And then I think the other question is, what does the bowling lineup look like? I'd imagine you're probably going to go with two seamers in Achini Kulasurya and Udeshika Prabodhini, but who are they going to pair with these two? Sachini Nisansala had a big game in this warm up. She took 4 wickets, so I'd imagine that puts her in good position to be in the 11. And we talked about Inoshi Fernando and Sugandhika Kamari kind of providing really good bowling. But I think one of the things we've talked about, and Estelle has really kind of harped on, is finding people to take wickets. So I think that's one of the things that they're going to want to look to do is, who are the wicket takers? How do they set their bowlers up? And what kind of new people come in? Because, Hassani Pereira, who had kind of held down that number 4 spot, is out. And I wonder if Nana Yakara is going to find her way into that number 4 spot on the back of this big performance.
You see, I think, Nick, that the women's side is kind of in transition, right? Because I think there's two things happening with it. I think firstly, the rest of the world is starting to wake up to the talent in this team, or what I should say broadly is in Sri Lankan women's cricket, right? I don't think we're considered a pushover anymore. I don't think teams come underprepared, and I think teams would, if they can, want to play their strongest players, because they understand that if you don't, and I know for various different circumstances, New Zealand aren't this time around, but Sri Lanka have become one of those teams you don't want to draw in a major tournament, right? And you probably don't want to go on tour to Sri Lanka, right? Because it's a difficult place to get wins. We've beaten almost everyone apart from Australia in the last few years in key moments, in big games and big series. But I think one of the things that the team and the management and the leadership around the team are having to deal with is, we aren't an unknown quality anymore. People are coming to us with going, right, these women can play a bit. I also think on top of that, it's a team in transition. I think around the world, and this isn't just the thing unique to cricket, but we're getting more. We're now in a kind of third or fourth generation of young women and girls who are playing professional cricket and played professional cricket for a really long time, or professional sport for a really long time, and therefore, because of it, the kind of standards around it are being raised from what we expect from professional women's sides. And Sri Lanka are at a position where they've got a young group coming through, and they've also got a young group transitioning out the side as well. So on top of considering all that, and it's relatively speaking for this team, at least the beginning of the new year, what do you think, Nick, would be kind of a good expectations to have on this side for this calendar year, going into New Zealand and with that World Cup in India later on in the year?
I think that my buzzword for this team would just be consistency, right? We've seen, like, as you touched on, Marky, they've come such a long way over the past 5 years. And they've produced fantastic performances, but I think that consistency hasn't necessarily been there. And I mean, you look back at the T20 World Cup, okay, played out on pitches that weren't that batting friendly. But you look at the scores, and I think Sri Lanka made what 93 against Australia, 90 against India, 115 against New Zealand, and there was one other game, wasn't there? Pakistan,
Mhm.
85 against Pakistan. Sorry.
Yeah.
So I mean, you'd have to say that those are like failings with the bat across the board, and the nature of tournament cricket is that you can't afford to do that. You can't let yourself get into a rut and have 3 or 4 bad performances back to back. So, can they score runs more consistently in conditions which aren't favourable? And as Dom touched on, can they take wickets? Like I think we've seen that Sri Lanka have a group of especially spin bowlers who can contain and control innings, but when it comes to attacking and taking breakthroughs, that hasn't necessarily always been there. So I think this series in New Zealand probably played out on slightly more seamer friendly pitches is a really good test. And I think that's been reflected in the squad because they've brought in a new seam bowler, is it Chitana Vimukthi, and the two batters who they've brought in also bowl a bit of seam up. So I think it's interesting to see how
Mhm.
Sri Lanka can do in conditions that aren't favourable for them. I wouldn't be too worried about results with this side, more about finding that consistent level of performance that you go out and come back in after every game and say that we've produced with bat and ball and in the field as well, and we haven't let ourselves down. I think if Sri Lanka can start to build that bank of regular solid performances, things will augur well.
Yeah, absolutely. Dom, the kind of breakout star for Sri Lanka last year was Harshitha. We know what she can do. We know what Kavisha Dilhari can do. We know what Rishmi can do. There are kind of, I want to say, our kind of key batting personnel alongside Charmery. But they're three players that just weren't consistent when it came to that major tournament when they went to the World Cup last year, right?
Yeah, I wonder too, the amount of work, the amount of effort they put in to get to the point of making the World Cup, winning the Asia Cup, whether emotionally they kind of peaked with that victory at home against India, right? And then to be able to pull it together for another performance. I think that's one of the tough things is that because our team is kind of in a growing phase, they need to play a lot of cricket against good sides. They need to get up against the South Africas of the world, the West Indies of the world. They need to get up for those Asia Cup matches against Bangladesh, against Pakistan. So I don't know if it's inconsistency as much as exhaustion. They played a lot of cricket. They played really intensely. They had to play qualifiers, and now I think it's more of a matter of perfecting. Right? You want to get that lineup right. You want to tinker a little bit. You want to say what happens in these matches isn't really a huge deal, but we want to get ourselves in playing shape for that World Cup. So I think it's a little easier this year to kind of say, all right, 2025 World Cup, we want to prepare for it. We're going to do everything to do well in that World Cup. Whereas I think much of 2024 was a prove it year. There were those successes in 2023 we were all so proud of. But then it was, okay, show us that you can play against South Africa in South Africa. Show us that you can handle West Indies at home. Show us what you can do in a home Asia Cup. And that takes a lot of energy. And there was so much growth and so much development from these players that I think it was a little unreasonable to expect them to just continue to go up, 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 up against an international field that was monitoring, taking everything into account. The pitches weren't what they were used to. So I think I view this as a tone setting sort of series where they kind of set up and get ready. And I think, kind of looking at what Chalmers did is to not play in the WPL, but to come out here. That's her number one goal. She's talked about making the semifinal of a big tournament like this, and I think that's what the girls are aiming for. And I think hopefully there'll be more space for them to do it rather than having to get up for every single series and then have the World Cup come at the end of that. I don't know if that makes sense, but that was kind of how I explained it to myself.